So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I am so blessed and excited to be interviewing Dr. Robin Rose. She is a longtime holistic doc. She had an adult life in a fishing community in India, found her way back to America somehow, started in nursing school, became a nurse practitioner, then went to med school. She was able to study with Dr. Andy Weil. So, she had this kind of holistic integrative approach throughout her training. And she has a really phenomenal story that she's going to share with us. And then I think the unique part of this interview today, Dr. Robin and I had a conversation previously. We have some similarities and differences between our own stories, but she has this beautiful way that she's taken her medical journey with her own physical health and her own integrative experience. And we're going to talk a little bit of metaphysics today as far as medicine and holistic well-being. We're not going to get too woo-woo, but I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So Dr. Robin Rose, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. This is a great conversation. I love this conversation, actually.
Me too. And we forgot to mention, obviously, you're in Hawaii. So everybody, you can be a little envious because Robin has now landed in Hawaii and she looks glowing and beaming. And I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, I'm not the most conventional of doctors. I started out early in my life, basically learning nutrition and becoming a bit of a lay herbalist, and did yoga. Living in India really had a profound impact on who I still am. And so through many different strategies in my life, I was a health food restaurant chef for a while. So, I love to cook because it's kind of like slobbering paint on a plate and getting to eat it. Um, and so my medical practice really was this collage of ways to achieve success. And, the medical world really tends to embrace a lot of negativity and fear. And I've always tried to find where's the shining light? What's the message in this? What's the gift of this moment? Assuming that the divine has a plan and is choreography in charge. And so ultimately, I came to kidney, unfortunately, as what we now call a wounded healer. I had a few unfortunate things happen in my life. The Holmes Rahe kinds of things where you end up going, oh dear, one unfortunate thing after another. And ultimately found out I had kidney cancer, which my response was like, health food Hannah doesn't get cancer. But, I live in a toxic world. And so who knows? I still have never really figured it out and didn't follow any of the typical ways that kidney gets diagnosed. I didn't have any protein in my urine. My blood pressure was normal. My blood sugar was normal, blah, blah, blah. So, in essence, what I learned was mostly medicine doesn't know how to early bird diagnose kidney.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my recent exciting work since I published my book has been to look at the kidney tubules, which is kind of an entry into our conversation because they represent discernment. And so this was an early thing for me to learn as the patient / wounded healer. What do I keep? What's good for me? And what do I get rid of? Discernment. I mean, that's life discernment, but at this microscopic level, that the kidneys do that. And so, in my world here, I had to decide, what can I eat? What shouldn't I eat? What people can I involve in my world? And what people need I bless them to stay away from me? Um, you know, Total house cleanup, toxins, so in that, all that is in our material world is reflected in the spiritual world. Kidney is like a gold mine for insight into life. And, in many traditions represents the essence of life, generativity. Chinese medicine is really helpful in that regard. And so ultimately I had, the you're not going to live for more than 5 years gun to my head, and repeated negative fear mongering from doctors I saw. And I grew up in New Jersey, so I kind of went to that. I mean, literally had to get that fierce to say no and call upon the divine. What strengths do I have? Come help me out. Come guide me. And it worked. I mean, it was amazing. Right from the first, I basically put out a prayer. I need somebody who knows more than I do. And I tell this story. I leaned over to the table that I was sitting there, opened up a Townsend letter to a article written by Jenna Henderson, a naturopath who works with kidney only. We spoke on the phone, and she basically rerouted my trajectory. And I sat right here in this beautiful spot. I'm sure you can hear all the birds. Um, and started looking stuff up. Okay, my potassium's high. What do I do? Did I remember from med school? Yeah, but not enough to really be the treating physician. And so over time, I really just dove in until essentially I found what's wrong, to understand what isn't working, what needs to be working. How do you achieve that? And how do you achieve that with nature is always my beginning step. I'm not a never use meds person. You know, there's a gift and reality to that. But even in my medical practices, unless it was urgency that required some action now, it's like let's do gentle stuff and see. Requires willingness, and that's the other part of the spiritual journey is, can I surrender myself to this process? I am a dancer in the troupe. I am not the choreographer. And so do I dance my part gracefully, or am I going to be like, I don't like this. This is terrible, and there's a big swath of the kidney community that talks about, I'm a kidney warrior. And I was like, yeah, I'm a kidney yogi. I want the ascending energetics to guide me and heal me. And so ultimately, thank God, my end of the story to date is I now have risen from a GFR of 30, which is pretty scary, right on the urge of, can we install plumbing? And then got myself to a GFR of 68, which really in conventional medicine is considered not even kidney disease. Well, you don't have any protein in your urine, so no. And I disagree. And a lot of my research is the beauty of knowing how to treat things with nature and with mind body, because then you're not medicalizing something, you're doing prevention, you're doing regeneration. And in my mind, that's really what almost most of us all want. Not like, give me a pill so I can go back and do whatever toxic stuff I do to myself. There are those people. I've had many of those conversations. It's like, no, I'm not giving you a pill so you can keep hurting yourself. And so, it's been a really beautiful process, not easy, much grief, much fear that I've had to learn how to get centered, surrender, do sacrifices. I mean, I use, the imagery of the altar, and that I am sacrificing to the holy, which is holy health.
Mm.
And so, it that the complete circle really helps to stay hopeful.
Mm. I'm so blown away by your story, and I'm just wondering, where were you when I needed you as a physician when I started my health journey? This concept of the wounded healer for the doctors or the providers or even the patients who are listening to this and don't really understand what you mean. Can you tell us a little bit, really in depth, of what that looks like to be a wounded healer?
Got it. Good question. So the first time it was presented to me, I reacted like, "Peh, blah, 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 blah." I mean, I really did not want to hear that. And that came from one of my longtime holistic physician mentors who I reached out for help. And after a while, I started to go, oh, exactly. Because there is a sense and an awareness when you've experienced something that creates intuitive compassion.
Mm.
And I mean, to be honest, early in my life, I had a lot of medical drama myself. And so, and had during med school, my significant other died, had leukemia, and, that would talk about drama. And so, that idea of wounded healer is that wound can be healed. And yet it's still a thing. I mean, you and I both walk around knowing there's this thing. And so it's kind of a sacred place that I have humility about illness. And I understand, if I talk to someone who's like, I got to have my Pepsi, I have compassion. It's like, well, yeah. And I did, I did this thing when I was kind of in an alarm state. I went to the local dialysis center and I walked in and I said, "Hi, I'm here to just let you know I'll never see you again." And
Wow.
these two very young, absolutely gorgeous Hawaiian young women looking at me like, "You're a little Lolo there." And then we explained, blah blah blah. I've had cancer, and they were like, "Oh, good. We never want to see you again." And it was this kind of like, I need to do this to own this, that I am claiming a path to healing without surrendering to the idea of inserting plumbing and being on dialysis. I'm old. I mean, this year I'm 75, which is so crazy. I still feel like, how did that happen? And so it's like I don't see the need to do that. If I was 20, that might be very different.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's no one story with kidney. It is this array. I just had this image of like the peacock tail. There's like so many different facets of this.
Yeah. When you're involved in something as serious as kidney issues, like you said, there's a lot of fear, and sometimes the medical system projects that fear onto the patient, and somehow the patient's autonomy and meaning regarding their story gets completely hijacked by the medical system's story of how this is going to go. So I just
Right.
love that you went into the dialysis center and you chose like, hi, I'm here. I know that this, somebody maybe thought this was going to be a part of my story, but I'm kind of reclaiming that my story is not going to go this way. And
Love that.
sadly, I see so many people in this community, the kidney community, who there's so much fear that they just serve over their autonomy and their
Yeah,
story to the medical system. And it's not a very empowered story. So I'm just
exactly.
so glad that you did that. One other question I had based on something you said earlier was when you called your friend who was the holistic mentor and you said that she somehow changed the mentality of how your story was going and the fear around this diagnosis. Can you share with us what she said and how whatever she said changed you? What was it that shifted your mentality?
Well, the irony was the first thing that was said was, "Oh, I don't have any kidney patients."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "You're not looking."
Mm.
Mentoring back, you see.
Yes, yes.
And a week later, I got an email saying, "You're right. I just found 13 people."
Oh my gosh.
And so that's not the answer to your question, but I was really honored for that admission rather than not even saying so. For me, it was just a matter of acceptance.
Mm.
There's a bit of self-esteem. Here I am, like the holistic doctor. What, you're so good at this, instead look at you.
Yeah,
And so it was a lot of shame,
yeah.
going into illness, I mean, I was encouraged, oh, tell your story, and I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And and so what I didn't say was that the end of this process for me, well, it links to the beginning because the oncologist told me, don't use the term failure. You're not in failure.
Mm.
Failure's later. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And she was an integrative doc, had actually done Andrew Weil's integrative fellowship. So I was very grateful because we spoke on this level. And that's the difference. It's, to the audience, if you can find an integrative or functional doctor who actually does this stuff, oh my God, night and day. And so, I mean, she also said, wait till you get a load of what the microbiome does to kidney, and didn't tell me any more. I was like, assignment. So, so ultimately it was to embrace with grace
Yeah.
rather than fear and anger.
Yeah.
And, mad at God, like, why is this happening to me? The why me thing, very common with cancer.
Mm.
And there's some answers, I mean, I had some insight about things that I've done, stuff I've gone through. I mean, I had so many, my medical practice was embezzled. My partner of many years assaulted me. My father had dementia, and that was a drama, and he died. And then my mom had actually died of complications of kidney disease,
Mm.
which nobody had even bothered to tell her about
Mm.
until I kind of stepped in and got a little more Jersey girl about her medical care. And it was too late for her. She died of congestive heart failure because of kidney,
Right.
and so to embrace the wounded healer is, I fell in love with this whole topic. Here I am still talking about it. So I said, wait a minute, I don't do failure. You go to med school, failure is like the end of the world, right? I don't want kidney failure. And so I was hearing the nephrology community say, people don't know what renal means. Um, so we're not going to use that term anymore. And I was like, I'll take it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's where I named renology as a primary care mentality. We take care of people with kidneys
Mhm.
and even early kidney disease. And so renology is the art and clinical science of kidney success.
Oh, I'm in love. Swoon. Swoon. I love it. And as you mentioned, your friend saying that she found 13 patients with kidney issues, I think it's a little bit of this elephant in the room that has a shadow over it because I didn't realize how prevalent CKD was until I got into that dialysis clinic and then realized there was about 10 others in my community. And I said, oh my gosh, what is lurking back here? Look, where are all these people? So, bringing awareness to the whole kidney thing is very important. And you're right, they're out there everywhere. They just we need to share with them that there's other methods and ways to look at the disease, to handle it, to find other people that support them a little differently, because the traditional way that we've been doing kidney disease doesn't really leave for much hope or even meaning making in their own story as they continue in life with CKD. I always considered my experience with kidney disease as an opportunity because I had yoga in my background too. So that's something similar between both of us is I have this beautiful spiritual connection to the underlying grace that's even through the most tragic events in life through my practice, through my studies. And I always looked at my disease as, okay, this is my opportunity for a spiritual recalibration. And where is my life taking me now? Just that simple perception, that having that perspective of it, as opposed to, why me? Oh my gosh, this is awful. I'm so scared. How do I fight this? How do I get away from this? I can't stand this part of me. It's like a rejection of this. You're actually rejecting something that's a part of you at that time.
Right.
So I was really aware that it's not healthy for me to reject aspects of myself. I have to embrace everything with love, even if it's not consciously written into my story. How do I embrace this with love? And that's been a huge message that I've tried to send to my doctors which has been a very difficult narrative for them to swallow because they are used to that militaristic firefighter type of energy. And to me, it's missing half of the whole. It's like, it's that drastic to me that it feels like it's almost like a relationship between a man and a woman. It's like, all right, you got the action oriented man trying to solve the problem and put out the fire, but where's the grace who can put everything and all the pieces into a beautiful story and make it loving and have meaning out of it? So you have writing that you shared with me, and it really beautifully weaves together medical science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom. Can you share how your journey with chronic kidney disease led you to integrate these factors and even things like bioregulator peptides into your healing process?
Well, I can't, this is my cue to just show off my little masterpiece. This is
Yes,
a
show us.
weightlifting material, short of 800 pages. It's a beautiful book looking at what we're talking about, the wisdom of kidney. And then I was very blessed to discover peptides.
Mhm.
And for me, that was a huge turnaround. I mean,
Mhm.
I was doing so many things and got a GFR up to from 30 to 50. And then I discovered peptides. And then I discovered the bioregulator peptides, which this isn't an answer to the question, but it kind of comes into it because what they do, they're tiny. It's like a little teeny fragment of proteins that are these big wound up molecules. This is like little. So they're agile, get into the cell, the nucleus without much energy cost. A lot of times things that, we need the ATP and the mitochondria, these just slide in. They get into the DNA and they reverse epigenetic damage that leads to disease because proteins that were supposed to be being made aren't. This is a simple way of looking at it. And so, I tend to do as below, so above, all of that. And so how does that relate to my being? All of this really, from the idea of I'm sick, I don't feel good. Is there something about me, despite all that, that's unconditional joy, unconditional love? Where is that little tiny voice inside? And so it never really wasn't part of it. I've had my moments where I was like, oh, wow, oops. And so I see nature as a healer. I see relationships as healers. It's like seeing God in everything
Yeah,
and recognizing there's the discernment when it isn't, when it's a
exactly.
delusion. This isn't the stuff, it's like, where's my gating?
Yeah.
How do I protect? And so really, the poetry of kidney has been kind of fun to create a new sense of self.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, it just resonates with me so strongly when you talk about the discernment. Because I was in the yoga community at a very young age, somehow I didn't get the education that that evil did exist in the world. I just was a little naive, and I thought that
Sure.
everybody had the heart of gold. And somebody said that to me one time. They said, "Stephanie, not everybody has your heart, and that's going to mess you up." So for me, understanding and learning that discernment was really important to me, and I learned that after I already had kidney disease. And I realized I have a real boundary issue where I'm letting things into my
Mm,
field, into my heart that should be getting filtered out. And I'm keeping them in. I'm keeping a toxicity in. And just how poetic is that compared to what the kidney function is?
absolutely. We've been talking about this, but um, Kabbalistically, with the tree of life, what you're just describing is there's Chesed, pure open heart, and Gevurah, which is boundaries. And they talk about you need that balance.
Yeah.
Too much pure open heart, go on tilt. Too
Yeah.
much boundaries, go on tilt. Where
Right.
and it's really about that balance point. And it's really helpful to recognize that, because then you go, oh, okay, I just, same with, with some yoga pose, ups, you don't balance enough, you're going to fall over.
Exactly, exactly. You
Yeah.
describe the kidneys as twin tablets of flesh and the filters of fear, the organs of discernment, like we just said. How do you see the role of the kidneys beyond their physical function more, especially as seats of moral and spiritual guidance?
I did a dive to do this talk into basically the biblical tradition around kidney
Mhm,
and the commentaries that have evolved over the centuries.
mhm,
And kidney is considered the counselor,
mhm,
the guide of integrity.
mhm,
And the other thing that I learned in all of this is one side, here we go again with that balance, one side is considered the evil inclination,
mhm,
evil,
mhm,
and the other side is the good inclination. And what I learned is using the evil inclination is a little bit overstated, because it's like we need to be disciplined, and we need to be a little like,
mhm,
for me to say I want to eliminate people who are too toxic for me to stay centered.
mhm,
That's that side. And so it's all, it really teaches balance. There's two of them. I only have one now. And so what I learned is there's divine presence that you can call upon to maintain that balance with those
um,
two little beans in there. And so, it's been inspiring for me. Like I learned how physiologically, when there's decline in function, there's adaptation
mhm,
that the body comes up with. Sometimes those adaptations aren't actually long-term safe.
mhm. Right.
So, okay, if my body can learn how to adapt, I can.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat here years ago and my potassium was high. My husband was eating beets that I wasn't eating because of the potassium, and I started to cry.
Mhm.
Oh, well, it wasn't really about the beets. It was just about the situation, and I was grieving, which I think one must successfully grieve, losing a sense of your sense of vitality or whatever. Okay, but don't linger there. And yet to adapt is to say, I can cook beautiful food that actually serves this body at this time.
Yeah.
And so the adaptation, the discernment, sense of counsel, which can be an inner dialogue, calling upon whatever guidance there is. And so, me and I pat this, my remaining kidney, and we have nice conversations.
Yeah. This sounds you're speaking my language and it's so packed with soul. And most of my friends in the kidney community and even providers, there's just none of this. There's none of this essence that's
Mm,
coming through you right now in the care. This is just
yeah.
a little side note question is there anything you feel we can do to help providers see the profound impact this kind of discussion and rhetoric has on a patient's just overall sense of well-being, why they're going through something like this?
It's interesting. Andy Weil said to me sometime not that long ago, last number of years, we're still in touch, that functional medicine didn't include energy medicine.
Yeah.
And at first I thought, is he being a little too harsh? But as I've observed, it is all about the tests, and that's not that different from allopathic medicine at that level. I mean, and to me, functional medicine is way different. And yet, when you don't recognize that there's intuition, that somehow there's like a knowing, sometimes there's like five options. I could do this, 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 or this. Well, how do I know which one's the right one? there's an energetic to that. And, energy medicine doesn't go past mitochondria. That's a little limited. It's like,
Mhm.
let's keep going. And I don't know. I mean, I've always been this way.
Yeah.
I always, as a clinician, found this to be so. I mean, I started all of this. I was a $2 an hour nursing assistant at a rural hospital in Tennessee. And, I would I don't know what I would do with people, in the middle of giving them their bath or getting them to sleep. And at one time, one lady said, "Are you some kind of special psychiatric nurse?" It's like, no, I'm just the bedpan lady. But, it's a choice.
Yeah.
And in med school, I found a few people who got that,
Yeah.
and most of them did not.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. In the settings now, a lot of doctors are strapped with $500,000 of debt when they get out of med school, and so they're working for corporate businesses that hire them. Very different role, because then it's like bang, 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 get them knocked through your office. And my office was in my house, and it was the color of my ceiling. My whole office was lavender. And I took time, sometimes just hanging out, shooting it until the energy opened.
Yeah.
And sometimes I actually would put people in my meditation room in my house, like, okay, you need to chill for a while, go sit in there and talk to my plants. And so, it really has to be a choice. And I don't know why. I can't understand why other doctors, other clinicians don't do this as their heartfelt work. I don't get it.
Yeah, it requires a lot of authenticity and a willingness to discuss things that, like you said, you don't want to admit to within the role that you're in. I know a lot of doctors or people in the public eye who get sick and hide it because it's not sexy. But you know
Yeah.
what? The world is crying for authenticity.
Yeah.
I think the whole sexy thing is going to be falling out of style. It's people want real.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to tell the truth about your whole story and admit, I'm a wounded healer. And, not only do I have the education, but I have the experience to match it. And this is what's been birthed from that. If you don't have the courage to talk about that, I don't think that providers see how that actually limits the downstream effects of the patient outcomes. I think that that projects. If you have somebody really willing to just be totally vulnerable, especially about their own shortcomings, I think that just opens a portal where patients can have more space and room for healing.
I just thought while you were talking, I have this memory
Mhm.
of knowing, thankfully, Bernie Siegel,
Mhm.
whose book Love, Medicine, and Miracles still is a gift. And I didn't get to work with him. He stopped doing surgery right when I was planning to go do like a rotation. But I was on the board of the Holistic Medical Association as a med student, and he was the president, and got to be very, very loving, kind of, father daughter almost relationship. And that's what he taught. I mean, he told stories, surgical cases where he helped people kind of open themselves to the poetry of their situation, and they got better. And that, she got rid of her unpleasant husband, and the cancer went away. And so, it was like back in the 80s, this conversation was much more prominent than it is now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've been slowly and surely squashing this essence more and more out of culture at large, but definitely in the medical system. It seems like we're hitting ahead here where it almost seems so separated and disconnected from this type
Yeah.
of energy that I've often wondered, are we going to have a parallel system that starts to flourish here because it's so blatantly obvious that the soul of medicine is somehow just She's exited stage left. She's not there anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people already are doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
people reach out to me. Just one of my neighbor's daughters just said, I have all these autoimmune problems. I'm done with medicine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, come over after I do this talk today and we'll chat, because people are just frustrated. And I think that, like I said, corporations taking over medical care has not been the best choice. I think there's some decision making that's happening. And my experience included 9 months working for a corporation out of residency. That was a nightmare. And I just couldn't handle. I was just like, I can't stand this. And I didn't care what it cost me. I was out of there. I had to pay them money and, blah, blah, blah. And and a bunch of people came to me and said, wow, I'm so inspired by your courage.
Yes.
Courage. It wasn't courage. It was just, I was disgusted with some of the things that were being forced upon me that I couldn't do in caring for other people. And so that in itself is a spiritual act, is really owning, whether it's your self-healing or taking care of the people in your life, but to do it with an ethic and a level of spiritual practice that is acceptable.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. I love that. It's powerful and we need more of it for sure. I think the whole business, the corporation might have been good for business, but bad for patient care. And now it's bad for provider care too. So it's so, I don't know. I hope we're at the tipping point of something. But you mentioned that at Sinai, all were healed and that at Shabbat is a time for restoration and alignment. How can people today use these spiritual themes of Shabbat and the wisdom of the Torah as a form of cosmic medicine for both body and soul?
I just learned that because I did this study into, the receiving
Yeah.
of wisdom. And in something that I read, it said, all people were healed. And so it's like that connection with the divine, we're all healed. Knowing that, okay, where am I and how do I rise? It's like, whether you think of it in chakras, it's a rising to higher levels of awareness. And so, using these suggestions of intuitive and counselor and generativity, all the insight, it's really meaningful. And, we take one day a week that we turn off all the gizmos. It's not a day of laundry and gardening and putting things here and there. It's really, I mean, we call it our honeymoon day,
Uh-huh.
but because, we're on vacation, essentially, vacating the human doing in lieu of human being. And it includes, long yoga on the beach. We'll meditate. We do music, sometimes do art. Um, just being with that nature that is the healing. And so I encourage people to do that. However, you know, it it doesn't matter what day you do it. It even doesn't matter if it's the whole day. I've told people, like, take a morning a week where you turn off all this staticky input. And I'm doing another talk actually tomorrow with a psychiatrist. And what I'm weaving together, I love doing this because it forces me to, like, another facet of this, right? And so the nature of kidney disease at a neurologic level induces a state of depression,
Absolutely. Hmm.
right? But it's physiologic.
Hmm.
And I had to realize that because one of my doctors, who's a functional doctor and someone I love dearly, said to me, you need to get past the anxiety you're having. And I'm like, I well, here's what I said. My mother had severe anxiety. All kinds of drugs got parked in her lap until I showed up. with my machete. Okay, let's get this stuff out of the way. And it turned out she had a renal artery stenosis and was hypoxic. She wasn't anxious, she was hypoxic. Come on, this is like a major difference. And so when I told this to this doctor slash friend of mine, it was like, don't label me with anxiety. Figure out, you're the doctor. I'm teaching him how to be a doctor. Figure out what's causing a neurologic hit.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I want to talk about tomorrow. So I'm talking about it already
I
today because
absolutely love
it's
that.
it's part of the spiritual practice. Because if I'm depressed, well, that's like, I don't want to be depressed. I'm not depressed. And that's what I came to realize. I'm in a state of joy. I'm just sick.
Yes.
And
Right.
if I can separate that out,
Yes.
then
Yes.
I can, it's like you have a baby who's crying, did you poop? Do your ears hurt? Are you hungry? What?
You're absolutely right. In a lot of kidney groups that I'm in, I've even seen psychologists or psychiatrists chime in the conversation and sadly say things like, anxiety and depression is going to be a normal part of your journey, and you might as well get on some medication now. And don't be ashamed because I'm on it too. And I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
this is a really terrible message. And from my own experience as well, too, there are times I've been plagued with anxiety after the fact. I had always come to discover that it was my body's way of indicating that something was wrong.
Exactly.
It was a message that my body was telling me something was wrong. It wasn't just happening out of the blue for no reason. And I certainly wasn't mentally causing my own anxiety.
Exactly. And I was proud of myself to, do the I know this
The
has kind of
Jersey flip.
the Jersey girl mood where it's like, no, I mean, because I'm kind of a little bit of a weenie, so I like having this like my cartoon self of Jersey girl, who's gonna
Yeah.
speak her truth and say, wait, that's not true. There's the discernment.
Yeah.
Don't do that to me. And you're right. I mean,
Mm.
that's kind of the point of this is it's I mean, anxiety isn't about anything. It's just free floating. So that's not anxiety. That's, maybe my liver putting out some chemical saying, hey, I just sent you a message. Did you get it?
Pay attention. Yes. Pay
Listen,
attention. Are you
to
listening?
listen. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And it comes in whispers. I mean, even, early kidney disease has no symptoms. Uh-uh. There's plenty of symptoms. They're just maybe vague.
Yeah.
And it could be any of 25 things. Well, okay, that's my job as primary care is to figure out which of those 25 things maybe it is. And so I get why nephrology doesn't have to figure that out.
Mm.
They get people packaged up. Here's your kidney patient.
Yeah.
And yet early on, the expertise of really good primary care is listening to subtle.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, I'm helping a person who's a local person whose daughter is Downs, and the follow-up that she got from the local clinic totally disregarded some things that were alarming to me. I'm trying to get her hooked up with a functional nurse practitioner, somewhat local, because it doesn't make sense to ignore stuff. And to me, that's a spiritual thing, It's like God just gave you a gift. What'd you do with it?
I have to say, this is so important. And because I had the experience of my yoga background when I got first diagnosed in my early 20s, I was very attuned and very empathetic of others' feelings, but especially my own. I was almost hyper attuned and sensitive to my feelings. And there were so often, Robin, that I would go to my doctor and say, I'm feeling this or I'm experiencing this. And it might have been subtle, but it was always brushed under the rug as not important. Don't worry about it.
Right? Don't worry.
Your baseline's okay. And looking back on my journey, I thought, my story might have been completely different if
Mhm.
all of these subtle and nuanced issues that I was expressing very early on were actually valued and cared for. It's just that they were all, I could only do so much for myself at the time. And the
Right.
doctors were really just saying, or even just sadly saying, well, I don't know what that's about, or I don't know, maybe it's hormonal, or maybe you're stressed. And it's just, it was like all of this
Maybe I'm
feminine,
stressed. Yeah, I'm sick. Maybe I'm stressed, you think?
yeah, like all of my intuitive wisdom was coming forth in the doctor's office and nobody could hear it,
I
So,
know, and that's sad. I mean, I knew that going to med school and seeing this lack. I even did got speakers and tried, to generate that kind of interest in my med school class.
mhm.
And, sadly, the experience is so stressful.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah,
just running as fast as you can.
yeah,
And then you
yeah.
get out and you're in debt. So you're still running as fast as you can.
What's required for a provider to really attune to this level of intuition is in direct opposition of what the whole lifestyle of the culture is about. It's totally almost on the other opposite spectrum. It should be
Yeah,
taught. I think that in med school it should be part of the programming where they go
I
on
do
this
too.
little mini spiritual retreat and they start to, because how can a provider, they can be intelligent, but how can they be spiritually attuned if they haven't yet experienced it themselves? Because attunement is all about personal experience. It's not something you learn in a book. You have to surrender to the experience. And I think that's what we're missing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would do things like do visualizations, have a lunch meeting and okay, go off on whatever visualization thing I would
Yeah.
pull off at the moment. And some people would come back and go, wow, that was absolutely transformational.
Mm,
And other people are like, I gotta go. I'm bored.
yeah.
And so, I don't really have a solution. I have some grief about it because I see people suffering.
Yeah.
I hear stories and, I think it's just a choice. And again, I encourage people choose well. It's okay to keep looking for someone to work with who really can hear you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can you explain the science and promise behind the bioregulator peptides, especially in the context of kidney health? And what role
Oh
do they
yeah.
play in your own recovery? And what should patients know about their potential?
Well, I'll do it again.
Okay.
I
Beautiful
love
book.
this. The art is from a Ukrainian artist who just totally heard
Fantastic.
me. I love
Beautiful.
this. Anyway, first I learned about the bigger peptides. So the first thing to know, insulin's a peptide.
Mhm,
Okay, so we know peptides. What do you do with insulin? It's a sub-Q injection
mhm,
because if you do it orally, the stomach acid will break it down and it's not doing what it's supposed to. Bioregulators, however, are so small that they are what the stomach acid breaks things down into. So conveniently, you can take these orally. And I first heard about the first peptide I learned about was BPC 157. And to be honest, it changed my life. I ended up with a damaged colon from the kidney surgery that I had, which left me in misery every day. And I learned from Beth Shirley, who's a really brilliant PhD nutrition pharmacy educator about nitric oxide, was telling somebody else on a Facebook post about BPC to raise nitric oxide, which is basically like oxygen. We need it.
mhm.
We need it to survive. And kidney disease compromises nitric oxide. So I got some BPC, spent a month reading about it, used it. That was the end of my morning misery.
Mm,
I mean,
wow.
it totally changed that piece of my story, which really was an unpleasant one. And I kept looking into them. I mean, I started looking at each one in regards to kidney. And then somebody mentioned pilotax, which is the kidney bioregulator. So these are basically extracts that have been treated chemically in ways that honestly I don't understand. It's not my my expertise. But there are schemes of chemical purification that bring us these really purified extracts. They've gotten heavy metals out and they've gotten prions out because they come from animal sources. There are some companies selling these that don't do all of that. Keep that in mind. Um, so, you know, the idea with them is that they can get to the tissues from which they originated. So if you take a kidney bioregulator, you're taking a capsule, the body deals with it the way it does, and it hones to kidney and can identify what aspect is not right and enter those cells, enter those nuclei, and get them to function again.
Wow.
It's not like, you take an aspirin and the headache goes away kind of thing. It's a slow cycling process. But I was part of a study done by a man who was an attorney and discovered all the people in his family died in their 50s. And so he went and got a PhD in nutrition. This is Bill Lawrence. There's some really beautiful YouTubes with Natalie Nidham interviewing him that are worth listening to. There's 2 on YouTube you can find. And I did that and was enchanted by what he's discovered. He went to Russia and has worked with the Russians who discovered this. They wanted to have this man who was a gerontologist in their military, this is back like in the 70s, discover ways to protect their military from our military. And he did. And then once he was out of the military, he got huge funding to basically study how this worked in general. And they have a huge institute. They've seen, like 2 million patients. So there's a lot of data. They're very safe. I mean, there basically isn't side effects. It's either, it's recognized as self. And so I started out I was in the study. So I let Bill Lawrence give me a protocol, and every month I had different ones to take, rotated different ones. And then I got the idea I wanted to just keep taking the kidney one, the Pilotech, excuse me. And so I have actually been taking it for several years. What I noticed, first, I think I was at 51 GFR. And after doing the bioregulators for a while, I got to 60, at which I was like, my neighbors could have heard me screaming because I was like so loud.
Yeah, of course.
Like Yahoo, because, conventional medicine says GFR 60 and above is normal.
Right.
I say it isn't. It's not disease, it's decline. And gee, you're vulnerable. I just spoke with somebody who was comfortably in stage 2, which is a GFR from 60 to 90, got COVID, plummeted. There's that vulnerability, So it's like, I walk around going, wow, I'm better. I know I'm better. I'm out there, doing stuff in my garden, hauling logs, whatever it is. And my executive function, my ability to be clear. So, there's a lot of them. There's brain, pineal, eyes, thymus, thyroid, lung, heart, blood vessel, adrenal, pancreas, stomach, cartilage, muscle, bone, ovary, prostate, bladder, testicle. I think that's the array. And my book really goes through all of these and what they do and how you would consider parathyroid too, excuse me. And all these things resonate with the body's desire for innate healing. I believe that we, both spiritually and physically, have a tropism to be well.
Yeah.
And so, I just find these to be, you don't just take bioregulators and okay, everything's good. The whole kidney story is the diet is not optional. There's a lot of rules, and part of the spiritual aspect is not whining about it.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is what I have. What do you want? You want to be on dialysis? You want to be dead? Eat whatever you want. Cool. I mean, and that's my conversation in my own head. I might say it differently to another person, but that's my own, like, hey, what do you want? What do you expect? What I expect is to feel well. How do you achieve that? You have to sleep good. Well, some of the pineal bioregulators really help reverse the circadian damage of kidney.
Mm.
And I know one of the questions is about night, so we can talk about that. I mean, I had cataract surgery. Over the time of figuring it out, my eyes got fibrosed. Now I don't wear glasses. I love this, actually.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I ended up having cardio stuff that I didn't have before. I take a low dose compounded amlodipine, which is a calcium channel blocker for blood pressure, which I used to have a 90/60 blood pressure. Years of me figuring it out. Now I'm aware, okay, I'm happy to do this, but I'm also exercising, meditating, taking magnesium, taking aged garlic, taking ginkgo,
Mm.
eating a heart healthy diet, um, singing praise, being positive, in my, yeah.
There's so much we can do in a world that tells us there's not much you can do.
And then you put bioregulators as your cherry on the top of that sundae, and it's like,
Wow.
and that was when after doing the bioregulators for a period of time, my GFR 68, the last few times I've done it. And so
Wow. It's amazing.
I'd like it to be, I'd love to get up to 80, but there's a thing you don't want to overdo
Right.
because then it ends up kind of roved.
The concept of nighttime messages from the kidneys, such as nocturia or sleep disturbances, appears both in your medical and your spiritual teachings. How do you advise patients to listen and respond to these calls for alignment and healing?
These are great questions. Whew. Um, so it was King David said to listen to the counsel of the reins, they called it in the Bible. It's the reins. If you see reins, like renology, renal. Oh, so that's part of why I want to keep that word. It's our tradition, And so they counsel at night. Turns out the in Chinese medicine, the kidney meridian is 4 to 6, I believe. So again, when the meridian is activating, we're sleeping. I had pretty much assumed my blood pressure was normal. I'd measure it in the morning, 120/70. Great. One night I didn't feel well and I took my blood pressure and it was like 170/95
Wow.
at like 11 at night. And I'm like, what's this about? And there were solar flares, which I apparently am sensitive to sometimes, not always. But I started looking this up, and there's this thing called non-dipper. So CKD is a non-dipper condition. What does that mean? Normally, blood pressure dips at night, not with kidney disease, quirky kidney. It can go up. And so when blood pressure is elevated, there's damage happening to the blood vessels of the kidney, to the nephrons themselves. And so this isn't trivial, like, hey, I'm cool, my blood pressure's fine. Maybe not. And so that really opened my awareness to this whole nighttime issue. Why am I getting up to pee 5 times a night? Gee, that's a little bit of a disruption to my sleep.
Yeah.
And so all of these things start coming together. And I take melatonin, not because it's a sleeping pill, but because it basically is an immune balancer and cardio friend. And the list of what it does keeps getting longer. And the pineal is responsible for getting the melatonin synthesized. And the pineal is damaged with CKD. Like the whole body has some effect, which is why all these different bioregulators have a place.
Right.
But by using the one that most people are familiar with is called epitalon. It can be injected, it can be oral because it's tiny. And then there's another one in the same class of bioregulators called endolutin,
Mhm.
which is a little bit more complex molecule. So it's a little bit better long term. And that can be cycled. You know, people can take bioregulators 10 days a month every 3 months.
Mhm.
And that just sustains the health of stuff, you know. And so, as you know, we know about senescence,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
a really interesting concept. You know, the cells basically start being old and they don't do anything. But they're eating and they're taking up space. And then they start making cytokines that affect the neighbors. And so the bioregulators actually have anti-senescence benefits. And so
Mhm.
as the body starts trying to make senescent cells, these come and just like, no, 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 no. Here, you go ahead, you know, you're old, recycle and
Oh,
well,
beautiful. Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah, it's really cool stuff to know. And what does that do for me?
Yeah.
Makes me less fearful that am I on the trajectory to go down? Or, you know, I mean, I'm aware of fear. It, it's it's part of it, you know, and I work at where's my hope because I think that gives some balance. I mean, a little fear. I did a talk locally, and this woman said, you know, I need the fear because otherwise, I eat all stupid stuff.
Mm. Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, but then, you know, how to like I
Yeah.
like, you know, it biblically, like you see the word fear, but actually if you translate it into the original language, it's awe.
Yes, I love that. You said that
And
before. Yeah.
and so, you know, that helped me too to say, I'm in awe of this process. I don't necessarily love that it's happening, but wow. And there's stuff I can do.
Yeah.
Sign me up. And yet I think you know, giving med students experiences, you know,
Mhm.
like doing a healing retreat,
Mhm.
having massage, doing meditation, doing, you know, honest sharing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then practicing that with each other. I mean, even that, like, you know, a 4-day weekend retreat with med students could possibly, I don't know. But you know, I think it's a choice that all of us have
Yeah.
to be spiritual healers as well as clinicians.
Hmm.
And for me, it never was an option. So I don't understand when I see somebody and they dismiss.
I do believe that everybody is given that opportunity, like you said. And I
Mhm.
think that depending on, what business they're involved in or what corporation they work for or who their friends are or what their culture is, it's a choice to not take those subtle cues. And what's difficult is that people who don't take the subtle cues in certain ways still get rewarded, right? You still see people getting accolades and awards for not being spiritual.
Right. Yeah.
So and it can become very difficult. But one thing I do know is I'll never forget when I went into my first yoga class. I was actually in a dance company, and I was going to be tasked with doing yoga to be in the company every day for I think 4 days a week from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. So I was being introduced into something that I was going to have to stay committed to. And I'll never forget when I walked in, the other female yoginis in the class, they approached me and they're like, oh my gosh, like this is going to totally change your life and you're going to be a new person in a couple months. And at the end of class, I walked out and I thought, did I just enter into a cult that I wasn't aware of? And lo and behold, I entered into a culture that was actually, for the first time for me, something that was holistic and healthy. And I didn't get what they were saying at first. And they were so happy and delighted and healthy. And I just was looking around like, where am I? And then over time, I discovered, oh, I'm home. Where have I been? And it can't help when you take on a spiritual practice. You can't go half ass, pardon my French. You have to go in with your full ass.
Yeah. Both
Otherwise,
sides.
it's not going to really do its magic. So I kind of see the complexity. It's a bit of a utopia for me as a patient to think, oh, are all of our providers going to become awakened and spiritual and it's going to be holistic? I don't think so. But what I do hope now that maybe is tangible and practical would be that certain people who embody this kind of embodiment of this spiritual side along with their clinical side at least can be really valued amongst the team. So when they do have more spiritually inclined people, they
Mm.
can say, you know what, I really want you to speak to this person because she's like you. I
Yeah.
think that would be awesome. And I love your idea of the med school retreat and really exposing somebody in like a 4 day immersion. You can get a lot done in a 4 day immersion. And
Yeah. Yeah.
empathetic listening, time, space, honesty, transparency, massage, yoga, energy, like just an exposure. And maybe it doesn't translate into a lifestyle, but maybe at least what it does is open their minds. So when they get patients, they don't begrudge it. Or like
Right.
my rheumatologist early on said, whatever you're doing is not working. You can just stop it. And that really affected me because that was my whole lifestyle. So
Right.
something like that, I might get on you about holding a retreat like that. For those facing chronic illness, what practical steps, spiritual, emotional, and physical, do you recommend for aligning the inner kidney compass with healing and wholeness? How can
Mm.
rituals, mindfulness, and nutrition truly support the journey?
I love this. I think surrender and willingness starts acceptance. And those aren't just words. I mean, that's a whole process
Mhm.
that comes and goes. Journaling, drawing, you know, letting it out instead of being in that shame place or denial. I mean, a lot of people are just like, yeah, well, I feel okay. I thought, these are just numbers. Well, okay, but some of the people who didn't listen to me early on when I had a group for stage 3 people probably a decade ago. Some of them are dead because they were like, I have to have my Pepsi.
Mm,
So really it's exploring, how do I succeed in my life? How have I been successful? And then how do I trip myself up to fail? And those are all things that we each can do on our own. Having spiritual time. I personally, like, I do a spiritual practice when I first wake up. It's a breath practice. I'm not quite awake yet, with a gratitude prayer and an acknowledgement that as above, so below. So that's kind of what I'm waking myself into, because there were times when I was sick where I woke up into like, oh no, this again.
yeah.
And so, what am I grateful for? Looking around, even when I'm sick, how can I have unconditional joy? And exploring, happiness and joy are different.
Yeah.
And so, we, my husband and I got focused on the whole limbic system retraining. And that's a lovely process. There's a bunch of different programs that are available. And part of my looking into what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is that the chemistry of kidney decline affects the limbic system.
Mhm.
That's huge. Um, in a way, it's like if there's an eruption that brings your brain into, oh no, things aren't okay, do I translate that into everything in my life with a sludge filter over everything? Or can I keep the gratitude there for the stuff that is okay?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then it's like, I've been told what I can't do.
Mhm.
What can I do?
Oh my goodness. That's so powerful.
And the next thing is self-love,
Mm.
really meaning it, and what words are coming out? Am I criticizing myself? Oh, that was stupid. Oh, I'm dumb. you know I'm going to, it's like I talk about medical curses. But part of self-love is to start recognizing self-curses.
Mm.
And then where'd they come from?
Yeah,
You know, I mean, who put this idea in your head?
exactly.
And so, you know, it's a lot like peeling away the layers and finding the light.
Yeah.
And, you know, the light of kidney is is a real thing. I mean, you know, at an electron level, I mean, you know, you can go from physiology to the divinity of it very swiftly and easily. And the diet part, yeah, it's like praying over your food, honoring it. I am grateful that I can get access to the food I need to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Not everybody can.
Yeah.
Um, I don't really want to get up and exercise. I'm grateful I can. You know, there were times when I couldn't even get up. And so, you know, that whole mindset and being willing to spend money on healing, you know, a lot of stuff that I've done out of pocket. I have great insurance.
Hmm. Hmm.
Doesn't cover a lot of the healing stuff. You know, I take a large supply of supplements. They're all quite out of pocket. You know, we grow and tincture many herbs. My next project is called My Kidney Garden.
Mm.
And I really believe botanicals have a place in kidney. Maybe when people are really, really sicker, I need a nephrologist who's botanical wise to really guide, because it's a whole different category of fragility.
Mhm.
But, you know, there's the majority of people with kidney disease are earlier and or don't even know it.
Right.
And so you know, making medicine, making food your medicine, growing plants that are healing plants.
Mm.
It's it can become your whole lifestyle, but not in a negative way, more in a joyous, I'm alive. I've been writing blogs. I
Okay.
just did one last night on Tulsi tea
Okay.
as a kidney friend, as a kidney medicine. And I will say that many of the botanicals are actually synergistic with pharmaceuticals. You just have to know, like Tulsi,
Right.
along with high blood pressure medicine, you might not need as much blood pressure medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This happened to me before where I've mentioned to a provider about some sort of botanical that said could lower blood pressure, and their actual response was, well, don't do it because then we can't monitor you clearly.
I mean, I had this come up when I would manage people who were on anticoagulants, you know, and we had to do back then. I mean, you don't have to do this anymore with the newer meds, but the specialist would say, you know, don't eat these foods because it's going to mess it up. And I'd be like, go ahead and eat it. I'll monitor and we'll adjust the meds.
Yeah.
You just have to be responsible to be consistent. You know, like if you're
Exactly.
eating this and it makes you need less meds and then you don't eat it, you're going to end
Right.
up with a clot. So don't push your luck. You know, I was very like Jersey girl, honest, lovingly with people, because people can be responsible. There are patients
Right.
who can't. You got to know who they are. You know, if someone's
Yeah.
intellectually incapable, my Downs kid, you know, she can't manage her care.
Yeah.
I know that. And
Right.
fortunately, she has an amazing mom. But you know, most of us are capable of making choices. And I like the questions. What's the light of my life? At the moment, I'm looking at him. He's
Who's
sitting over
who's
there.
who's him?
That's my husband Paul, who showed up right before I was 60 at a
Mm.
moment, um, literally a week after a partner of 10 years had physically assaulted me. And
Oh,
I
Robin.
had the smarts to
Yeah.
split.
Yeah.
And I believe in magic. I mean, literally, I was at a Halloween party a week later and some explosion happened and this whole other life has come. And so
Yeah.
maybe the light of my life is about um true loving,
Mm.
not toxic positivity. You know, there's a lot of like
Yeah.
not that, but you know, and having that be, like, I call it holy matrimony. I mean,
Mm.
we've been together now, this is our 15th year. We don't fight,
Oh,
not once. We can be grouchy and cranky,
sure.
I'm a whiner, but um, the ability to be in the world and to speak truth.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy in the world that we live in these days, where
Yeah.
people react so much to things.
Yeah. I love this so much. This gives me hope. So, but also, talking about
Mhm.
your relationship and love, I honestly think that I know it sounds cliche, but love has the power to heal. If you're in that
Mhm.
authentic state of love and partnership and love with when you have that love for yourself, for your partner, it just you can't help but express it out into the world and feel connected with
Yeah.
all that is. And I had a friend once, and he said, real love is not being afraid to say the thing that might split up the relationship, because if it's real
Mm.
love, it'll only make it stronger.
Oh, I love that.
And so I just love this idea of this soulful, authentic love that you found. And
Yeah, I mean, I was short of 60. It's, just as my 60th birthday, it's like this whole thing flowered, which was
mm,
quite amazing. And honestly, it didn't make any sense. Like, how is this happening? I mean, when I was diagnosed, it was like, you're kidding me. And I don't know if I could have sustained and endured in the way that I've been able to without having this loving relationship. I
mm,
don't know, maybe, I mean, it's because it's a who knows. But I look back at my story and it's like having somebody there who allowed me to be sick when I was sick,
mm,
and then took care of everything else.
mhm.
And that's been reciprocated. Over these years, he's had stuff. And so
Yeah.
having a reciprocity, there's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass
Oh,
by
yes. Yes, I
Robin
know it.
Kimmerer.
Mhm.
And I love that book. I mean, I went to Syracuse. I'm like, really? I don't know if she was there when it was a long time ago. But the idea of having reciprocity with everything,
Yeah.
meaning even admiration and appreciation. Like I look at all of this stuff and I have this utter appreciation. And that she described that as reciprocity.
Mm.
And I love that because, all of these things, I mean, you're right. It's like having a love relationship with the earth, with
Yeah.
the air,
Yeah. Yeah.
with my pots and pans. I love
Yeah.
my knife.
Yeah. I get that. I get that. What really strikes me here is earlier on in the conversation, you were talking about you were doing a lecture and a woman said, "But I need that fear because a little bit of fear keeps me motivated." And in my world, it's the opposite. I don't need the fear. It's the love that keeps me motivated.
Yeah, yeah, I
But I
agree.
think a lot of people, sadly, have never experienced that love.
Mm. Yeah,
You
and
know,
I think that's what I told her. It's like, okay, I hear you. When you can love yourself enough just to do it, it's like taking care of your kid.
yeah,
Do you give your kid Pepsi, your baby? I mean, treat yourself like,
yeah,
you know, I mean, I love that muja. When I was in my residency, which was not the easiest moment in my life, I sometimes when I was getting assaulted by questions that weren't very kind, I would do this. And I
mm,
was really doing this. They didn't know.
mm,
I'm just
mm,
standing there like this, but it was like, I can ground myself. I'm holding myself intact.
mm,
And that I found that with seeing some of the doctors who were just giving me threats. I mean, the last nephrologist I saw, and I haven't since I've found my functional doctor who is kidney savvy, um, basically, she looked at me after looking at, I wrote up a beautiful history form and wrote all the stuff I was taking. And I had gone from 30 to 51 at that point. And she's, doing this. So I was like, I'm here. Could you talk? And and she actually just turned around and looked at me and said, um, "You're taking too many things." And I said, oh yeah, did you notice my numbers? And she's like, yes, but I haven't read about them, so you must stop. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm like, honey, you know I'm a doctor and I'm older than you, so that's number one.
Mhm.
Um, and idiot here says, ah, you want references? Then I have references. And she's like, no, you're going to hurt yourself.
Mm,
So I was like, all right, I can't keep doing this to myself.
mm.
And so, it really does take confidence in like listening to your own messages,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you don't know what to do other than what they're telling you, pray about it, call out to whatever it is that you relate to in divinity. It's like there is that wisdom.
Yep.
And
Yes.
and it's sad to me because I know so many people are fearful of not doing what their doctors are telling them. And you know, some of the people in my group were going to renal dietitians who were being told, eat canned food and you can have jello with food coloring in it and God knows what. And I was just like,
Yeah, that
wow.
happened to me too. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. So, happened to me. Do you feel as though this fear that we can hold around the concept of illness and medicine and patients and going through our experience, do you think that providers have the same fear? They just might not be as cognizant of it as
Oh,
the patient.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's like
I,
a projection of both of them having fear.
well, if you take care of really sick patients,
Mhm.
you see horrible suffering. I
Sure.
mean, I have so many tapes in my head, stories in ICU, stories in the ER, all of it, cancer patients. So, what I started to realize first was oncologists were seeing awful outcomes.
Yeah.
It's depressing. I mean, as a family doc, I saw some awful things, but I also had the babies and the pap smears and the
You had more
well.
balance.
Exactly. I had healthy, you know, vertical as opposed to horizontal patients.
Yeah.
And so I have compassion. I learned that from Bernie Siegel. You
Mhm.
know, hug your doctor. They're suffering.
Mm, mhm.
And so, it's a challenging thing, but the kidney doctors who have very sick dialysis patients, look at me with a GFR of 35 and I'm like a success story to them.
Mhm. Right. Right.
And I get it, it's hard to just see sick people all the time.
Mhm.
And so, that's why I would love to see a cadre of rhenology doctors. Most of us aren't kidney specialists, and all of the patients we see have kidneys.
Mhm.
So there's an obligation to know what to do. And also, okay, if you're taking care of a rheumatology problem, pay attention to the kidneys. I mean, in this case that I was looking at with this Downs young woman, um, syncope, she fainted at Special Olympics and then was brought to the ER. They did a CAT scan, of course, because she can't really say what's going on. And she had hydronephrosis
Mhm.
with thickening of her bladder and ureters.
Mhm.
But when the mom took her for follow up with the primary care doctor, it seems like really didn't know what to do about that and is going to send her to a nephrologist. And it's like, no, you need a urologist at this point because the bladder thickening is what's causing back pressure into the kidneys. And it's like, this is simple stuff. This is like, medicine 101.
Mhm.
And so, I'm not putting out much hope, but I think you can be a good biohacker for yourself without being too cowgirl. I mean,
Yeah.
there are things you can do with kidney that can hurt. There are
Yeah.
herbs that can hurt you. There are foods that can hurt you. Okay,
Mhm.
you learn. But what I really want to do is see more doctors. And I have been doing doctor education, and I also will do peer-to-peer consults. I've gotten on a Zoom call with the doctor and the patient and just
Awesome.
talked to the doctor with the patient there listening, basically, and I mean also conversing, but
That's great.
it there's got to be a breakthrough
Yeah.
with how we address kidney and not just wait till people need dialysis. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that idea of you having peer to peer with the patient. And that gives me hope for doctors, that their ego isn't getting in the way to the degree where they're not willing to ask someone else for their expertise and help yet. So that's
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
sign of hope.
yeah. And that's mostly in the functional community that I'm doing that,
Right.
and able to make some fun recommendations. I mean, other than the diet and how are you sleeping and exercising and did you detox your house and your life and your mind, let's do some nutrient testing. Let's do some dysbiosis testing. Let's do some mitochondrial evaluation. I mean, there's so many things. And my recent fun is exploring the kidney tubules, which decline before you see a change in GFR.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that gives you an interesting compound. What do we do about that? Because generally nobody's testing for that. And I've come up with some tests that do assess tubule function. So it
Wow.
makes it really sweet and easy to be able to take a look and say, okay, here's some tubule things. The tubules are the ones that discern. So that's where the action is. I mean, do we keep this? There's transporters, there's all kinds of ATP. So the mitochondria are really important. And when they're not working, toxins are stuck in the body or useful nutrients are excreted.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time,
Yeah,
for your wisdom,
thanks.
for your grace, and for your undying attunement to the spiritual and to nature. And I'm just so in awe in a good way of you. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks so much. And to the listeners, stay hopeful, stay happy.